The way that we speak and the words that we choose are an extension of our identity. So to be told that how we express ourselves is wrong or unprofessional is to be told that who we are is somehow inadequate. All right, guys, welcome back. We're finally talking about something other than braiding sweetgrass. We've got Gloria Anzaldúa's How to Tame a Wild Tongue from her book Borderlands. And I read Gloria Anzaldúa's work my first year of college, and I swear it completely changed my life. So I want to begin with a poem that I wrote inspired by her work. This is called The Violence of the Bull. My last name can be translated. Can I? I fight the process laying bare. Bleached flesh squirming as the sharp-tipped utensil dipped in ink approaches. I channel la malinche that lives inside me. I have no choice but to consent to the penetration of the translator. She draws my veins and curves, keeps a light grip when shading in my skin, tattoos my brain with memories I won't be able to escape, like when I was with my grandpa and the white lady at McDonald's asked me if I was being kidnapped. Learned colorism and my place in it. And then when I started wearing my natural hair and Papa said I was just trying to pass as Latina. Learned being enough isn't attainable. Being the embodiment of oppressor and oppressed, I am not your language lesson or your intro to Mestizaje history course. My identity doesn't belong under your microscope. My friends used to tease me, Peyton of the Bull. But despite my family's attempts at assimilation, their susceptibility to the continued colonialism that is washing us away into whiteness, no translations occurred on my birth certificate. I think about the documents that track the history of my family's border crossing / being crossed by the border. One reads, name, Luis Toro, accompanied by Guadalupe Benavides de Toro. Arrival contact, brother, Melchos de la Toro. Departure contact, Florenco de la Toro. I look at the paper and I think, the gringo, read border patroller, could have tried to claim us for himself, to officially translate us into his language, force us to stop speaking Spanish because this is America. But he enjoys the violence of misnaming. So instead, he'll take and name our land, and as we pass through its borders, he'll continue to write, Del Toro, or Toro del, or de Toro, or de la Toro, or Del Toro with a lowercase d, or just plain Toro, or Del Toro as one word, or, but never of the bull. I sign my name and I think, I might as well just write Peyton Cristina del Colonialismo, or Peyton Cristina del Patrilineality with some complications, or Peyton Cristina del Bullshit. What happens when your name reflects the harsh history of the blood that pulses through your body? So that's the end of the poem. So in Cheech and Chong's song, Mexican Americans, he says Mexican Americans are named Chata and Chela and Chema and have a son-in-law named Jeff. And he goes on to say Mexican Americans love education, so they go to night school and they take Spanish and they get a B. Okay, so I am, metaphorically speaking, Jeff's kid. Okay, and I tried to take Spanish in school for years, but all I really got from that was a linguistic mental block and a whole lot of embarrassment and shame. So my grandpa, Homero, grew up working in the fields in Texas before marrying the whitest girl he could find and moving to Michigan to start his family. So he persistently refused to teach his children and grandchildren, so me, Spanish in fear that he would perpetuate the linguistic discrimination that he faced because of his accent when he was speaking English. So my grandpa couldn't bear the thought of being the reason that one of us would ever feel like our ideas were invalidated because of other people's responses to the way that we spoke them. So while growing up, my Tejano grandpa of mixed Spanish and indigenous Mexica descent would always tell me that I was Tejana. But I never lived in Texas, and I didn't speak Spanish, and I didn't really look like him, right? He had dark skin, I have light skin, he had another tongue, I had only one. And since apparently it was Tejana or nothing, I chose nothing. So my light skin gave everyone in my white town a pass to ignore my last name and call me one of them, right? And I didn't resist. and I became Peyton Christina del Toro with the Anglo kind of hard R that curves your tongue and puckers your lips rather than the Spanish R that you can say without interrupting your smile. So in Anzaldúa's How to Tame a Wild Tongue, she explores how language and the act of naming and therefore defining can be weaponized to enforce power dynamics and erase cultural identities. And she articulates that we have the opportunity or perhaps the responsibility to push against these boundaries and to use our voices in ways that are authentic to our lived experiences and to recognize the power in the hybridity and fluidity of language. So by engaging with Anzaldúa's work, we are reminded that writing is more than just a tool of communication, right? It's an act of cultural and personal expression that can challenge societal norms and create new spaces for understanding. So as we continue to develop our own writing, I want us to consider how our linguistic choices, the choices that we make about language, reflects our identity and how they might serve as a form of resistance against the forces that seek to confine or suppress that identity. Okay, and in doing so, we're not only honoring our own voices, but we're also contributing to a richer and more inclusive literary landscape. So as we've seen, language is deeply tied to power. The way that we speak, the words that we choose, and the stories that we tell are all shaped by larger societal forces. But as Anzaldúa shows us, we also have the power to reshape language to fit our own personal experiences. So we can bend, blend, and create new forms of expression that better reflect who we are. So Gloria Anzaldúa's How to Tame a Wild Tongue is a powerful exploration of language and identity and the cultural conflicts that arise from living in a borderland, right? A space where multiple cultures and languages are intersecting. Anzaldúa, who is a Chicana feminist writer, she uses her personal experiences to illustrate how language is not only a means of communication, but a key component of cultural identity. And that essay delves into the struggles faced by individuals who speak a language or a dialect that differs from the dominant one, right? Which highlights how language can be a source of pride and resistance and also oppression. So Anzaldúa begins this essay with a vivid anecdote from her childhood where a dentist sort of reprimands her for her stubborn tongue, right? Which is a metaphor for her refusal to conform to linguistic norms. And that metaphor grabs the reader's attention immediately, using that image of the wild tongue to convey the complex challenges of maintaining one's cultural and linguistic heritage. So the vulnerability inherent in being in a dentist's chair, right, where one is physically restrained and subject to another's control, that mirrors this emotional and cultural pressure to suppress one's native language and to conform to a dominant linguistic standard. And this striking imagery helps readers relate to the broader implications of linguistic control and cultural suppression. And throughout the essay, Anzaldúa skillfully uses the metaphor of the tongue to explore how attempts to tame or suppress one's language are forms of cultural erasure. So she critiques how this pressure not only diminishes individual identity, but also disrupts communal connections and cultural continuity. By maintaining that metaphor of the tongue as a central theme throughout this essay, Anzaldúa is connecting various aspects of her argument, showing how linguistic assimilation affects personal and collective identity. So I want us to remember, writing is not just like this neutral vehicle for recording information, but a deeply political act that can reinforce or challenge power structures. So in our discussions about writing and information literacy, Anzaldúa's work underscores the act that writing is intrinsically tied to power. And written expressions are shaped by the cultural and political and historical contexts in which they are produced. So this means that what we write and how we write it are influenced by the norms and biases of our existing societies. So Anzaldúa's exploration of language and identity highlights how writing can be a means of resistance against cultural erasure and oppression. And by asserting the value of non-dominant languages and perspectives, as writers, we can challenge historical injustices and advocate for a more inclusive representation of diverse experience. And this understanding of writing encourages us to approach information literacy with a critical eye, right? We spoke about this last week. It's important to question not only the content of written sources, but also their origins and the power structures behind them. So by analyzing the how and the why of certain information and how it's presented in particular ways, we can better understand the biases and the limitations of our sources. So writing is inherently discursive, right? Meaning it is embedded within and reflective of broader systems of meaning and power. This discursive nature of writing, discursive is like basically conversational, right? So this discursive nature of writing implies that it is both influenced by and influences the social, cultural, and political environments in which it is being produced. So historical records and academic texts and media reports, they're not mere reflections of reality. They are constructed intentionally through specific ideological frameworks. So written texts often become the authoritative record, right? Overshadowing these oral histories that may be equally valid but less institutionalized or institutionally respected, right? And this discursive power of writing shapes how knowledge is valued and which voices are heard and listened to. And the political implications of this are obviously significant, right? Who controls the writing and the dissemination of information has a profound impact on cultural representation and historical memory, right? Collective memory. So by recognizing that writing is a political act, we become more aware of the ways in which our written work can reinforce or resist those dominant narratives. So I want you to take a second and reflect on your own experience in, for example, history classes. How has history been recorded, right? Whose stories are told and whose voices are prioritized? The written word, the written record, has historically been a tool of colonial power used to control narratives and marginalize Indigenous and Black people and the narrative of history. So by acknowledging the political nature of writing and the historical connection to colonialism with writing, we can become more intentional in our own work, ensuring that we're not unintentionally perpetuating the very systems of power that we're seeking to dismantle. And this brings us back to that concept of information literacy. So today, with so much information available at our fingertips, it's more important than ever to critically assess the sources that we are encountering. Who is writing? What perspectives are they bringing? And what interests are at play? And what might be missing? So Anzaldúa's critique of the dominance of English is a reminder that not all ways of expressing knowledge are given equal weight in our society. So now I want us to think about TikTok for a second, okay? What's fascinating to me is how platforms like TikTok are democratizing the act of publishing, making it accessible to a wider audience, right? It's easy to dismiss TikTok as a platform purely for entertainment, but it's also becoming a space for education. People are using TikTok and other platforms, but I'm mainly focusing on TikTok here. But they're using it to share knowledge in ways that are engaging and accessible, bypassing traditional gatekeepers of information like academia. This means that we have to approach these new forms of media with a critical eye as well, understanding their potential to both democratize and also distort information and perpetuate the exact thing that we're trying to surpass, right? But why should learning only happen within the confines of a classroom, right? Or through a textbook? As Anzaldúa shows us, knowledge doesn't have to fit these pre-existing molds. It can be fluid and hybrid, just like language itself. And social media platforms like TikTok are reshaping the landscape of education by making learning a bit more interactive and accessible and relevant to contemporary audiences, and obviously happening outside of the classroom. So as we read Anzaldúa's work and as you listen to this lecture, I want you to take a second to think, how has language shaped your identity? Have you ever been made to feel small for the ways that you express yourself through language? And for students who only speak English, I need you to not dodge this question. Okay, so for example, I've been discredited in male-dominated spaces simply for using the word like in conversation, which is a word that, despite being a common part of everyday speech, is often labeled as feminine. So in a sexist context, for example, this seemingly small linguistic habit can make a person seem less serious or less competent or less intelligent, right? But why is that the case? The way that we speak and the words that we choose are an extension of our identity. So to be told that how we express ourselves is wrong or unprofessional is to be told that who we are is somehow inadequate. And these experiences of language policing aren't just about communication, they're about power, and they reveal deep-seated biases in our society about who gets to be taken seriously. And it doesn't stop at speech, right? In writing too, we face judgments about how our language should conform to certain standards. So I've been told that my writing reads too much like a self-help book to be successful in academia, as if a conversational or accessible tone diminishes the value of the ideas being communicated. So this is another form of gatekeeping. Academia often privileges dense, jargon-heavy writing, assuming that the complexity of the language being used equates to intellectual rigor, right? But this assumption overlooks the fact that writing is about communication, right? If our goal is to convey ideas, to spark conversation, and to connect with others, and to help and better our communities, then clarity and accessibility are strengths, not weaknesses, right? So think about your own experiences. Have you ever felt the way that you speak or the way that you write doesn't fit the mold of what is considered proper or professional? Maybe you've been told you use too much slang or your writing is too casual. Maybe you've been criticized for your regional accent or the way that you pronounce certain words. These critiques aren't just about language, they're about power and identity and cultural standards that dictate what is accessible. And often these standards are rooted in biases about class and race and gender and education, right? So for those of us who are multilingual, these pressures are often even more pronounced, right? Maybe you've experienced being treated as less intelligent because you speak English with an accent, or because you code switch between languages. Maybe you've been told that speaking in your native language is unprofessional or inappropriate in certain spaces, or that using a mix of languages is too confusing to other people. So these experiences are deeply tied to cultural identity, right? And they reveal the ways in which language can be used to marginalize those who don't fit into this narrow definition of what is normal or correct, and I'm using air quotes there. So as we move forward in this course, I encourage you to think critically about how language shapes not only your identity, but the identities of everyone around you, right? When we critique someone's speech or someone's writing, we're not just commenting on their communication skills, we're making judgments about who they are and where they belong. So don't be afraid to bring your whole self into your writing and let your writing reflect the complexity of your background and your perspective. Whether we're writing in standard English or some other language, or maybe a mix of many, I want you to remember that your voice is valuable. So in your own writing journey, I want you to think about how your words can be a tool for exploration and transformation. Writing is not about fitting into existing molds. It is about shaping new ones. And in doing so, we become part of a larger conversation about who we are and who we can be. A conversation and a way of communication that is hopefully and intentionally not defined by colonial and heteropatriarchal logic. All right, so best of luck. I'm excited to read your work this week, and I will see you again next week.